Well, good morning, everyone. I would like to welcome you to Avera Past Place and our education center located here, and welcome you as well to the 7th annual Better Business Bureau Cybersecurity event. Is there anybody here that kind of started going towards the Avera McKinnon campus this morning? Okay, good. I'm not alone. So I started, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. That's here. So we appreciate those of you that have attended before, and then even those joining us new today. We kind of had to switch this at our Prairie Center, which houses our cancer center, our inpatient rehabilitation, as well as our Avera Surgery Center. We are just so busy there on campus, and our first priority that we have at Avera is certainly our patients and those we serve. So we appreciate coming here and the folks here arranging all of this. I think it's appropriate we're actually here today in this facility that Avera has repurposed for a lot of uses and departments that support our entire health system. Used to be Colorado Tech that used to be here. So this is all about learning today that we have. My name is Tom Bosch, and in addition to being blessed to serve as the Vice President of Hospitality at Avera McKinnon, I also serve on the Better Business Corporate Board and the local advisory board as well. I wanted to take certainly a moment to thank our sponsors today. They've been with us since the very, very beginning. So SDN Communications, Kelloland TV, as well as Avera. So please join me in thanking those. Well, my last order of business today is it's my pleasure to introduce you to Brady Mallory. Brady's going to be emceeing and moderating our event today. Brady serves at Kello TV and serves the noon and the 5 p.m. newscast. One of the gifts certainly that Brady has been blessed with is to be a great storyteller. And after providing one of his stories, Brady's goal is, or he feels it's been successful, if you learn something new and you've been inspired by what he has shared. Kind of an interesting little tidbit that was shared with me about Brady is he loves going to concerts, and he's a huge Dolly Parton fan, actually, that he has. As a matter of fact, he's such a huge fan that at one of the concerts here in Sioux Falls, him and his friends were told by Dolly they need to sit down, and of course they were in the front row. So please join me in welcoming Brady Mallory.
Well, I think the main takeaway from that story is I met Dolly Parton and now we're friends. She told me to sit down because no one could see over this hair. Someone tweeted about it the other night and said, Brady's hair defies all the laws of gravity. It's true. Well, thank you. Good morning to everyone. Thanks for being here with us. In addition to anchoring the news, I just officiated my first wedding, so I'm a pastor now. That'll explain why there will be a collection plate going around in the middle of the show. Well, here's why we're here. Actually, I was told this is my most important function. The Wi-Fi is Avera guest, no password needed, so if everyone needs to log on, there you go. Well, every week it seems like there is a new data breach in the country. Last year we've seen hospitals and cities just come to a standstill because their systems have been hacked into. As you probably know, this type of breach is called Business Email Compromise, BEC. And it is the subject of our event today. So according to the FBI, BEC has resulted in more losses than any other type of fraud in the US. We have a terrific group of presenters today that I would like to introduce you to. Jody Gillespie is the director of the Office of the Attorney General Division of Consumer Protection. Thank you. Chris Isles is a sales engineer at SDN Communications. Where are you at? Oh, there we go, right in front. And Erica Culm is a cyber intelligence analyst at Dakota State University. Let's give them a big hand. So, welcome everyone. The format for this morning is we will have each panelist present all of their information that they have for us today. Following the presentations, we will have an open Q&A, so start writing down your questions now. First up is Jody.
Thank you, Brady. Like you said, my name is Jody Gillespie. I'm the Director for Consumer Protection. We are a division within the Attorney General's office. And we get to come here and talk about BEC on this bright, beautiful, brisk South Dakota morning. Get excited. It's hard to put a fun, inspirational spin on BEC. It's a tough subject, but it's something that we all have to deal with. First and foremost, I want to give my disclaimer. Got to throw those out there. This is not to be construed as legal advice. They always tell me that I have to say that. I am not a tech person, and I'll say that again, I am not a tech person. And most importantly, I'm not an attorney. So there's my disclaimer. You know, being able to put that spin on what is BEC and how it affects us, some of the things that I want to bring to you guys are what consumer protection is seeing in this particular realm. You know, like they said, we've had this conference for 7 years. 10 years ago, you couldn't get businesses to talk to each other typically about what was ailing them. Now we're coming together talking about how we can combat these things. You know, you sit and listen to people talk about what they're seeing in their businesses. Yeah, we had a phishing hack, spear phishing. We've had an ammutation, a new one. We had a great cure, or we're looking for a cure for ransomware. Those types of things, and people would assume that you're talking about diagnosing something in a doctor's office. It's just the different things that have changed within technology, and that's what we're seeing. What is BEC? It's a cybercrime that typically is perpetrated by organized crime, and the scam usually targets the person that can write the checks. You guys know that, but it is actually deploying, when they set out to deploy that BEC, they're using one of the oldest tricks, and that is deception. I mean, if you look at all of them, it is a form of deception. It's just taken on a different realm. And so their goal is to obtain that money. That, if you look at all of them, the end goal is the money or information. And that's what we have to start figuring out how we're going to stop that. Like Brady had said, the Internet Crimes Complaint Center, better known as IC3, has talked about this being one of the biggest areas that they are seeing. Last year in 2018, an approximate loss throughout the United States, the 50 states, and I believe Canada is also encompassed in this, $301 million lost in a 1 month period. That's some huge money that's going out, and it's businesses that are affected, and ultimately your consumers get affected by it. So this is something that everybody is talking about, wanting to try and figure out how to combat this and the best way to do it. Again, I'm not that tech person, and so what I'm bringing to this conference is the things that we're seeing. And I want to give you kind of an overview. There's typically 6 common themes that those scam artists use. And with those, I kind of want to point out what we've seen and to give you an idea of the vast majority from one realm to the other that we're seeing not only in businesses, but in government entities, charities, private sectors, those types of things. So the first one is your credential phishing. And I'm not going to go into the points, I'll leave that to the IT people. Credential phishing, or CEO, CFO, say those really quick, gets tongue-tied. But we had a law firm that was actually, an email had been received to the business manager from a managing partner that simply said, we need to pay this expert witness fee. And that wasn't something that was out of the norm, so she paid that witness fee, and she wanted to make sure that that managing partner knew that it had been done. So before she left that day, she texted him and said, by the way, I got that witness fee paid, so that's all taken care of. To be only met with what witness fee? And so within 5 minutes, she's contacting her bank and she's contacting us. It's at 5 to 5. The check had been wired to Florida. So we're trying to get that stopped, before everything gets closed down. She actually went in on Saturday because the banks in Florida, they're open, trying to combat that. We hit it hard on Monday morning, worked with the banks, thought we had some things going on and were able to stop things, only to be told that no, the money went out. So that's one of them that we've had. We've had hospitals. We had one particular hospital that had a loss of $39,986. It was to pay for upcoming conferences. The email that the business manager had received was from the CFO, and it was for conferences. And then he said, and while you're at it, I'd like to go ahead and get the gift cards ready for the Nurses Association. And so all of that was done. They purchased the gift cards, they sent the money out for that registration, and all of those funds were lost. When we started checking into this particular hospital had prior to probably 8-9 months prior to this particular scam, they'd also been hit with a data breach. The data breach happened prior to our laws coming into effect, so there was no notification that was needed, and they actually had 2 data breach issues there. Ironic or not so ironic? I don't think it's a coincidence in my opinion. But we've also had here, and this was last year, where the scam artists used actually the South Dakota DOT in their scam. We didn't have any businesses here in South Dakota that were affected by it, but we had many businesses throughout other states that had sent product, and the South Dakota DOT received the invoices for it. The difference with that email, there was one letter that was put in there, and so it had 3 Ds versus the 2 Ds in the email address. So that one was one that we had. The next one is your invoice scam. This is one that we see the most of. So we've had businesses that are affected by this heavily, where they receive the invoice from what appears to be that true business with an actual logo. If you go out and you look at the business address, it may be similar, maybe kind of a little bit sketchy on there to where you can't see the full address on there, but you go out and you check it, and this business happened to pay the $27,000 bill. Subsequently, within a short amount of time, they received 2 more invoices, the second one being approximately a little over $50,000, and they went to pay that as well. They received that third invoice, approximately $12,000, and that's when they stopped and looked at it and said, something's not quite right. They were able to get that second one stopped through the bank, did a stop on that one. The first one, we were not able to recover. And there's always W-9s that were accompanying those. So they're using different facets in that capacity. We've had engineer firms, same type of thing. The common theme with those typically that we've seen is shortly thereafter, those businesses are receiving checks, actually fraudulent checks that have come in and been written on their accounts because they have that information now. With both of those particular entities, that was what was happening shortly thereafter. The third one is your W-2. Tax information is the third component that they'll typically use. We've had both private and public schools here in South Dakota that have been targeted heavily with this. It's simply an email going to typically your business manager that says they want to get a list of all of the W-2s for all of their employees within their school district for budget purposes. And like I said, we've had them across the state. In the western part, in the eastern part, all over the place with that one. So we reached out to the Department of Education to say, this is what we're seeing. You guys need to get this out to your schools to make them aware not to give that information out. The fourth one is your real estate. And we've actually had one individual, this is actually a consumer that ended up losing out on his closing costs. He had received an email from them changing what bank it was actually going to. And so he sent all of his closing costs, and it looked like it was coming from his real estate agent. And so he lost out on all of his closing costs because it went to a foreign bank before he realized what was going on, because his real estate agent was going to be out of town that particular day for the next couple days, and would be reachable, was the email. Fifth component is you're changing the bank accounts. We had a pastor that supposedly had emailed their business office indicating that I had to change my bank accounts, I need my checks now sent to this one. That one seems to be coming up more and more, so it's something that people need to be aware of. And the sixth component is your gift cards, where they're wanting those gift cards to be sent out as gifts to individuals. This one we actually had 6 churches that were affected, same denomination, and they were all targeted within a short amount of time. There were, like I said, the 6 of them. I believe we ended up getting 2 or 3 of them actually stopped. The first ones that went out weren't able to be stopped. They'd already picked everything up with those. We've had mayors at the local level, same type of emails that are going out. They want to reward their employees with gift cards. Could you get those purchased for us? Those types of things. We've had a specific email, and it was simply an email that was from a charity stating that they needed, here's a routing number, we need funds sent. So there was no invoice, but it was showing that a bill was delinquent and they needed to get those funds sent to them right away. And it was an actual routing number that was given. Again, with all of these, the goal is, our goal through consumer protection, if we get the notification quick enough, is to contact those banks, get that money stopped. That is our first and foremost goal for anybody that's been victimized, is to stop the money from getting into those scammers' hands. That's what our premise is. And I bring these things up to you guys simply because you guys can go out and read about all the different types. You know what's going on in your areas, but it always seems like it's being touted that it's in New York, it's in California, it's in Florida. And I bring these examples to you so that you are made aware of the things that are happening here in South Dakota. And it may be, business here in Sioux Falls, it's in the western part of the state, it's all over. And so it's affecting everybody as a whole. And with that, again, I'm not that tech person, so I'm going to turn it over to the people that actually deal in that technical realm, because I don't want to baffle you and dazzle you with my brilliance. So I won't even attempt to. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris. Thank you.
Can everybody hear me okay in the back row? Can you hear just fine? I think I'm a walker, so I want to keep pinned down. I don't know if you noticed, but my hair aspires to be Brady's hair. I don't know if I'll ever get there, though. That's pretty amazing.
I believe in you.
I'm that techie guy, I guess, and that's my role here today. I want to talk to you about what SDN has been seeing, show you some examples, kind of break them down, to look at what the components were, to kind of get an idea of how the message was crafted, and then really put into your minds some possible ideas for what you can do to combat this. On kind of a policy level is what it turns out we're actually kind of looking at this point. You can talk about a Nigerian prince asking you for money, and that's the anecdotal thing that we say when we're like, yeah, that must be a phishing email. Is that from a Nigerian prince? Guess what? Most of these scams come out of Nigeria still. So that's not that far off base. But what we do see is that the grammar has improved greatly. The spelling errors are not there as often anymore. So they're getting more sophisticated. They're learning how to get a better take rate on their scams. So let's look first at some BEC attempts that this has come into SDN communications. These are all internal examples. So our own Vernon Brown was impersonated. Now, you'll notice that is not Vernon's email address. It is something very long and confusing, but made to look like maybe this could be coming from a real server somewhere. But it was to somebody in our accounting department saying, can we set up a payment to a vendor today? Oh, it's what Jody just talked about, right? A vendor payment for some event or some service that was purchased. So Now this came in, and Vernon, obviously being the smart, savvy person that he is, reviewed it and was able to flag it as a problem, and it didn't go anywhere. But one thing to point out about what a lot of these business email compromise scams, a characteristic of the email versus a standard phishing email is that there's no link in this message. You don't see a link to click on. That also means that there isn't a link to evaluate and to use in order to determine whether it's spam or not. Quite frequently, those ones with links are going to get caught in your spam filter if you've got a really good system set up and it's tuned well. So this makes it through because it's just text coming from a valid email address. Next one, from our CEO, Mark Schlana, who, again, has an email address that's not Mark Schlana's email address, but sent to someone else in our office just saying, hey, are you in the office? This is meant to be conversational. It's meant to start a conversation, a back and forth, something that's going to start to earn this person's trust. So the follow-up email to this would have been something else. It would have been a lead into whatever the scam was. Again, this wasn't Mark. More examples here. We've got our sales VP, Ryan Punt, also not his email address, sent to somebody in our accounting department. Again, Jill. Apparently Jill gets sent a lot of this stuff, so she's really good at spotting these. But this is changing payroll information. So it's just deciding that it's going to go to a different bank account. She said, hey, just want to let you know I changed banks. Please send all my money into this location. But it wasn't real. It said it's from Ryan to Jill, but Jill was able to notice that it's not his email address. But if you're not looking closely, if you're not looking at the actual email address that it's coming from, you wouldn't necessarily know. You'd see the name and you'd assume that that's who it was. Well, anybody can spoof that name that's sitting out there. I can put whatever name I want to on my email account to show up on the other end. It's a little bit harder to actually spoof the entire email address, but that has also happened. So I'm not showing that email on screen, but we have had a message come in that looks like it's coming from within the SDN communications domain. And so that's a lot more difficult when you can have something like that, because then that one validation step that about that I got to check that email address, that fails to detect it. So you got to look for other indicators. So when we go through and talk about what those indicators are, there will be a number of them that we have to do in order to really kind of validate that. Here's another one from I believe an actual hacked account. This was the email address and the name here was a valid individual, a valid email address. It was their email address sent to our marketing group. But the things that clued them into the fact that this might not be a correct or a real email was the fact that the subject line was payment, and then this is from the OneDrive team, which would be at Microsoft, and it says that a brochure has been shared with you. So it's not what you would expect. It's not the invoice that you would expect if the title of if the subject line was payment. So that also is a key indicator. This particular link may have had nothing wrong with it. It may have actually been a link to something on OneDrive, but again, would have potentially been a lead in to something else where they were going to ask for funds to be transferred. And then this is my favorite. This was sent to me and a bunch of other people at our company, and it's from our CEO, and he says, I saw this and thought of all of you. And there's an attachment. And when there's an attachment, you immediately go, whoa, okay, something could be wrong with this. And Mark doesn't just send me emails and say, hey, I thought of you. Not typical. But guess what? This was real. So Mark had actually grabbed a security poster image, a cybersecurity poster, and sent it to this group of us. And he, honestly, this was real. And I hit the fish alert, though. So then our IT department took a look at it and went, nope, you're good. That was from Mark. But it was a good example of how, yeah, we're going to get some false positives, right? When we're being careful, we could potentially end up with those false positives.
So,
Question?
so I've noticed, like with the emails that came from outside of your system, it shows the domain where it came from. But
Yes.
with Marks, it did not, so I assume that that would come inside from SDN. So is that,
So the big difference here is that the other messages were already flagged as less trusted, and so their domains were being shown. Internally in our systems, that's definitely a possibility. I don't know the inner workings of our email servers or our settings in Outlook, so that's definitely a possibility that because of that, it's not showing it because it came from within. So yeah, that's a possibility, but I wouldn't trust it. You know, that's still one of those things where if it's asking for payment or if it's asking for me to open an attachment, I still would be skeptical about that and would ask for the verification. Yeah. So moving on into how this attack actually gets crafted, right? Because somebody has to put these email messages together. Somebody has to figure out who to send it to, who to look like they're sending it from. And so I want to talk about the social engineering that goes into that. I was recently thinking about the words social engineering and phishing and spear phishing and business email compromise and ransomware, and I realized we could actually utilize social engineering to accomplish spear phishing, which would perpetrate business email compromise to deliver ransomware, which means this is all very confusing because when you think about targeting one particular issue that you think you have, like, ooh, you know, we talked about business email compromise today, and that's a big deal, so we need to look into it and combat it. Well, you know, really what we're talking about is combating all of these different vectors and attacks and exploits and methods of implementing an exploit. So we have to take a broader picture when we look at, you know, when somebody says, you know, we need to protect against this. Well, what does that really mean? If we're protecting against business email compromise, that means we're protecting against spear phishing. It means we're protecting against social engineering. So we need to understand those things that are behind what we, you know, see that's the storyline on the news about a business email compromise that occurred. So the social engineering starts with data collection. You know, an easy way to get data, something that doesn't really cost anything, is going to be to grab social media platforms and your corporate website. Now these are tactics that we could use. You know, we have access to these platforms. And so if your information, your email address, your phone numbers are out there, if you're tied to events, which many of us are through social media, then this kind of information that somebody would use to gain your trust in a spear phishing email is out there, and they just need to collect it. And then they need to craft the message. Right? They need to put that message together in a way that it does gain your trust. Now you say, hey, I saw you at such and such event. You probably don't remember me, but I just wanted to get, you know, this, that, and the other thing. A way to start a conversation, gain your trust, and get you to let your guard down. And then the timing of it is also key. As Jody mentioned, the realtor that it looked like this message was from, asking them to put out closing costs. That realtor was on vacation. So there was no way for this person to validate that that was actually from them. It was done during a time that they were away, during a time that they were maybe not looking at their inbox. And so the perpetrator could potentially be in their inbox, sending and receiving messages if they had hacked that account, and the realtor wouldn't know about it. So the timing is also important, especially with a request for funds transferred. You know, if I say, hey, I really need to get these funds transferred within the next hour or we lose the deal, you know, it has to happen. And I'm sorry, I'm in a meeting, you can't talk to me, right? So it's requesting for the funds transfer, it's saying that there's an urgency and that I'm unavailable. So let's think about all those things as we go and look at 4 different clues that we can look for when trying to detect. So the first one is asking the question, is the sender legit? Is that name correct, because maybe the name is spelled wrong. And, maybe the one from Ryan Punt didn't say Ryan Punt, it said Ryan Bunt, and maybe it wasn't quite right. And so you can detect that. Correct email address. If you're opening it up, if you hover your mouse over the person's image, even if it just does say their name, you can usually right-click on it on your desktop and get into it. But what happens if that email is on your phone? Can you hover a mouse over that email address on your phone? You have to find a different way to get access to that email address if you're going to try to do a validation on your phone. It's a little bit different than if you're sitting at your desktop. Also, I want to point out the fact that this email address is not the same as this email address. Any of you spot the difference? Corn, yep. This one says corn penny, not company, but an R and an N looks very close to an M. So if you're just browsing through that email address looking to see if it says what you think it says, then your mind is going to create that confirmation. Oh, yep, that says what I think it is. But that's not actually the same domain, right? And then asking again, are you sure? SDN Communications versus SDN Communications with one M. So, if you've got multiple letters, you can do a little trickery there, or letters in between two parts of a domain name, right? So there are a number of different ways that you can be tricked into thinking that it is the correct domain. I don't want to get too technical because I'll eventually get over my skis. But there is a Unicode way of spoofing a domain name, but you're using other characters. So a string of other characters in Unicode would look like something. I saw an example where apple.com was actually this weird string of text that shows up as the domain. But on your email program, it's going to show up as coming from @apple.com. So there are ways to even get you farther than just this close examination. So even just this clue alone, looking carefully at this doesn't tell you for sure that it's legitimate, especially since somebody could have actually hacked into that email account and has access to the real email account. So moving on to clue 2, were you expecting this from them? So I wasn't expecting that email from Mark. That's why I said, I think this is phishing, because he doesn't usually send it to me. So were you expecting that email for a funds transfer? Were you expecting to have your closing date moved up and you're getting this notice from your realtor early? Do you know that they might be making this request? So if you've been talking to them recently and they didn't bring this up, why would they now be telling you about this funds transfer? If you knew about it, if you had been talking about it, okay, it makes sense that they're asking for it now. And then does the style match with other messages? If the person is verbose and writes you a novel every time they send you an email, and then they send you a one-line email, that's pretty atypical and maybe a cause to be worried about it. The third clue, does it sound urgent? So those urgent requests are designed to motivate you to action right away without questioning. Sometimes if the attacker is getting really deep into it, they'll look for an employee who's fairly new on the job, but has the authority to write a check, because they're looking to please the boss. They're looking to please their management and do a good job and be efficient. And so maybe they're less likely to call out and be able to spot those kinds of inconsistencies. And the last one, are they unavailable or did they say they were unavailable? Either one of those is cause for concern. If they're unavailable, you can't reach them to validate something, then you don't have that validation step. So what can we actually do? And I think a lot of it comes down to policy. And I've identified 3 different policies here that kind of flow. So the first policy is a spam filter policy that's going to catch a number of things. Probably a lot of phishing messages, maybe fewer of the business email compromise messages, but you might get some that are sent from domains that are known to be bad, and your email filter is going to be able to kick it out. So those things go away right away and don't necessarily require additional inspection. Now the second one, establishing a policy for inspection of requests to transfer funds or whatever it is. If there's a critical business function that you want to protect think about what that policy is going to be for inspection so that you go through certain steps of validation. And then establishing an effective policy to preemptively verify or knowing that there's an expectation of verification. So if a CEO and CFO, as it typically is, doesn't always need to be, if they have a process defined where whenever the CEO needs to actually make a funds request, that they are going to send a text message first with a number in it or something like that, and then they're going to send the email. There's an out-of-band validation piece. Out-of-band simply meaning it's not all email, it's not all phone call, it's not all, if they're using two different communication methods. Both of those would have to be compromised in order for an attacker to be able to spoof that type of validation. So that pre-validation to where the CFO or whoever's receiving that request to transfer funds is able to identify that this is a legitimate request. Or on the backside, an expectation of verification. So the individual knows that when they send that request to transfer the funds, that they're going to immediately receive a phone call from the person saying, hey, did you want me to send these funds? Was this real? And as long as there's that expectation of validation, you don't necessarily have a situation where that other employee feels bad about calling the CEO on his vacation. Because if he requested a funds transfer on his vacation or didn't, he should be contacted, right? Either way, he's going to want to know that the message was received or be able to validate that there was something wrong with this message. And then when we look at individuals, not just businesses, not just policies now, what can you personally do about it? Well, for the person who's the identity theft victim, which would be typically the CEO, is not publishing your production email, not the email that you use for internal communications, not publishing any contact information. Now, I will say, that's kind of a bad idea to do when you're in sales. Not being able to be contacted is a bit of an issue. So, there's a balance there, I think. Think about whether you were expecting a request from them. Don't send those one-line requests. Send something else, because those one-line requests are the ones that are coming from the scammers. So try to make yours formatted in a different way. And remember that the person receiving the real transfer request is going to be skeptical of those one-liners because you've taught them to be. And then think about whether your transfer request sounds urgent. Try not to make those urgent ones, and try to make sure you're available. And don't tell people that you're not available on social media. Right? These are all things that we've heard in one form or another at some point, but kind of bringing these together kind of creates that policy that creates a good protection layer. And then also thinking about who's receiving this message and what they can do about it. So again, not publishing your email address. If there's no email to send that request to, then there isn't necessarily any action happening after that. And then again, thinking about whether you're expecting it from the CEO, whether it sounds urgent, and making sure that you're following the policies that have been put in place. And then at the end, knowing that protecting the company is your highest priority, and that verification procedures apply. So the CEO isn't going to be hopping mad when you call them on their vacation. And that's all I have, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Erica.
Good morning. My name is Erica Culm. I'm from Dakota State University. I'm a cyber intelligence analyst. I've actually only been in this position for the last couple of months, and I'd like to be able to walk around like Chris, but it's hard to nervously grip my notes if I'm walking around the room. So I'm employed by Dakota State University, but I work out of the Fusion Center here in South Dakota, in Sioux Falls. And one of the questions we get asked a lot is, what is a Fusion Center? So Fusion Centers were established after 9/11 as a way to share threat intelligence information between federal authorities and our state and local authorities. They're located in states and major urban areas throughout the country. We're a state-owned facility, and we act as a conduit between federal and state and local public safety partners, with the purpose being to assist with the gathering and analysis of information to support the efforts of law enforcement and critical infrastructure in our state. We receive the threat intelligence from the federal level, we analyze it to see what it means to us on a local level, and then pass that along to the local authorities as that's needed to our local agencies. We also will gather information from the same local agencies and pass it along the other direction or to other agencies within the state. My position there, the cyber analyst position, is a brand new position in our state, and I've only been there, like I said, for a few months. So one of the things I'm doing right now is reaching out to other states to determine what they are doing in the same position. So Wisconsin, North Dakota, Washington State, Washington DC area that has an established cyber position to see what they're doing and how they're doing it. And what I'm finding actually is each state does things a little bit differently. So we're still shaping the position here to meet the needs of the state of South Dakota. Some of the things I do currently do is cyber threat analysis, social media threat monitoring for our local law enforcement and other public figures in the state, dark web scanning, and digital forensics. And I anticipate we'll also be doing information sharing and incident reporting. So what I'm going to talk about today in terms of business email compromise are what do you do if you do find yourself a victim? Who do you call? Who do you reach out to for help? What information will they need from you when you do call them? How to recognize if your own email has been compromised, because we talked a lot about getting an email from an address that's actually spoofed, but what if they're actually in your email? How do you recognize that and what do you do about it? And then also to reinforce some of the things Chris said and expand on how to detect it and what to do about it. So what do you do if you find yourself a victim? Well, the first thing you're going to do is call your bank. Call your financial institution. Ask them to call the financial institution that the money was transferred to and try to put a freeze on that money. And then what you're going to do is call local law enforcement to get a report filed, and at the same time call Jody at Consumer Protection so they can start the process of helping you. Depending on the level of expertise of the law enforcement, they're going to ask you to call IC3, the Internet Crimes and Complaint Center. That's actually one of the steps that the Consumer Protection Office will walk you through. So while you need to do that, let them walk you through it. If it's a significantly large dollar amount, and I don't have a number, but there is a threshold for the number being very large, then it's best to call the local FBI office and get the FBI involved. And they can help, they get Department of Treasury and put a freeze on those funds. And it is important to report these incidents. Like Jody said, we never used to talk about it, and people are reluctant to talk about when they're scammed. You're embarrassed, you don't want anybody to know, you don't want it to affect your business. But it is really important to get it reported. And the intention isn't to go out and put on the local news that your business was compromised. That's not the point. The IC3 then funnels that information to the FBI, and they can eventually, hopefully, make an arrest. We just had one in September that was global with 281 suspects across 10 countries. And the majority were in Nigeria, but also the United States, Turkey, the UK, and Ghana, and 6 other countries. So it's through the international collaboration of law enforcement that they can stop some of these incidents. So again, it's just really important to get it out there and get it reported. So when you do call law enforcement, some of the information they're going to need are, from both a victim standpoint and who you sent the money to, are the names, your name, who you sent the money to, the locations, bank names, bank account numbers, an intermediate bank if there was one, the SWIFT number, which is a bank identifying number, the date, and the amount of the transaction. Also, I think when we get these emails, the first thing you want to do is after you're scammed is delete it. Get rid of the evidence, you don't want to see it, you want it out of your system. But it's really important to preserve that so we can then analyze it and see where is this coming from? Can we tell where it's coming from, where it's originating? We can look at the email headers and might be able to determine some of that information from how the email was routed. In your email system, there should be a logging function, and depending on your level of IT expertise, you have an IT person do this, but make sure your logging is turned on, and then save those logs so we can analyze, is somebody in your system, or is it merely a spoofed account? And if they are logged into your system, where are they logging in from? That same preservation information is also what IC3 is going to want when they have the incidents reported to them. It's the IP address, the email address, date and time. If you get an invoice that looks like a real invoice, they're gonna wanna see a copy of that. Some of the things they'll do, they'll ask to keep it quiet. And Chris touched on this also. It'll come up, it's a big secret, or, don't tell anybody about this. They'll wanna know that. Timing is some of these incidents and the wording. Often it won't just be an email, they'll follow it up with a phone call. Did you get my email? It's really important, click on that really quickly. If you do get phone calls, note the phone number. And those two can be spoofed, but it's still important to keep that information. If you get a phone call, pay attention to if the caller has an accent. Any information that you can provide is going to be helpful for them to then further investigate and find out more information about where it's coming from. Emails, like Chris said, can be spoofed. They're actually coming from outside your organization but look like they're inside. But sometimes they can get into your actual email account. And they'll sit in there for a really long time and try to understand who are you communicating with, how do you communicate, how do you word your emails. So they'll lurk around and learn your mannerisms, your speech patterns, and that type of thing. So some ways you can identify, you might be sitting and thinking, did I click on something and now they're in my email? You may not know right away, and it generally starts with a phishing email. But they trick you into entering, or another user into entering your credentials, and then they're in your email, and you don't even know they're in there. Some of the things to look for in your email, go into your email rules. Is there a different reply to email address in there? Is it set up to forward to somebody that you don't know? Is there a form set up that's been created, a custom form that you didn't create and don't know where that came from? Or rules that reference an external website or an executable file that someone has set up in there. And again, I mentioned the logging earlier. Make sure the logging's turned on your email and have someone analyze, is it logging in from an IP address that could not possibly be yours? Chris also touched on many of these things, but they will do significant amount of research on your organization before attacking you. So watch what you're putting out there on your corporate website. I think we always, in the Midwest, we try to be helpful, right? Try to give people as much information as we can. But maybe just think about, does all that need to be out there? They're gonna look at your structure, who reports to who are the important people, are the C-suite executives, who's HR people, who's in finance. They're gonna do a lot of research before actually sending some of those emails. Social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, just watch what you're putting out there. And just think about, does it need to be out there? Or is it something that maybe we can handle a different way? Meeting minutes posted online, schedules posted online. Just sometimes you can't avoid it, just like Chris said. Sometimes it needs to be out there, especially if you're in a sales position. But maybe just analyze, does that really need to be out there? And again, recognizing some of the scams, the phishing emails, look at the reply to domain names. Is it a 1 or is it an L? Is it 1? I got a phishing email just this morning. It looked like it was coming from HR. And I figured out that it was phishing, but on the bottom of the email it said, this is a phishing email, click on this. They're not always that obvious. So that's another point, just slow down. They often will time them right before a holiday or right before a long weekend. You're in a hurry, you want to get stuff done, you want to get things cleared off your desk before you leave. Just slow down a little bit. And also, if you're reading your email on a phone, it can be hard to see some of those cues that are a misspelling or a different letter. And if you're like me and can't always read your phone, or don't have your glasses, or don't want to make me need glasses, just if it's something you're not expecting, if you don't know what it is, if you're not sure, just wait until you have the ability to see it on the screen, where you might be able to look at it a little more thoroughly. And this will sound really corny, but if it seems fishy, it probably is. Some additional prevention information. Set up two-factor authentication on your email. Does everybody know what that is? Do you know what two-factor? Anybody not know what that is? Okay. So just make sure that's set up. I'd set up two-factor in any account you log into if you can. And it's a pain. You have 2 ways. You always have to enter 2 things, but it's a less of a pain than having to deal with losing money later on. Email software, you saw this on Chris's examples. Have your email software flagged from it's coming from external of your organization. So if you get an email from the CEO that says this email originated outside of the domain, that's probably a clue that it's coming from somewhere else. And also for your organization, only communicate using your organizational email. Don't send from your personal email address. For smaller businesses, don't use free email, don't use a Gmail, don't use a Yahoo. There are some inexpensive alternatives that can be set up with a business name on them. Some emails have an option, it's called impossible travel, where if you log in from California or from South Dakota and then California in a 1 hour time span, that's not possible. So it can flag that. Until we get the transporters like on Star Trek, which would be really, really cool, that's not an option. Not all emails can do that, but if you have that option, turn that on. Then you would know, hey, somebody's trying to log in from Mexico. That's not gonna work. And then finally, like Chris talked about with the policies, just set up policies and communicate those policies. It's one thing to have them on file, but just make sure your employees have a way to read them and understand what they mean. You know, don't ask for something at the last minute and that type of thing.
All right, we have come to our question and answer session with our panel. I have 3 questions, one for each of our folks up here. I'll start it off and then we'll take questions from the audience. First of all, Jody, how does consumer protection enter into the picture in business email compromise fraud?
So obviously, it's consumer protection, and so we always get that question of how does this actually fit into the realm, and can you actually help us? Some of the things that we do look for once we get the money stopped or figuring out whether or not the money can be brought back is whether or not we have some jurisdiction, and we look at, we're charged with upholding deceptive trade practice violations. And one of the components within that statute says that intentionally set out to deceive. Obviously, they're intended to deceive you. They sent the BEC. But then we have to look at the component of whether or not we actually have that invoice. Do we have actually a service oriented, because part of the definitions talk about a service has to be obtained. And we look at whether or not we can actually take, and if we can locate certain individuals, because what we're seeing through our office is, yes, they're going to Nigeria, the majority of them, once it actually gets out of the United States, but there are people here in the United States that are your money mules, and they are transferring those funds time and time again. And at some point, you have to stop the bleeding. And if these people are coming in and they started off as a work at home type of a thing, they're somewhat a victim as well. But once you start looking at it, if they've been doing this for 2 years, they don't have a job, this is literally their job, is allowing funds to come in and they shift funds out. I don't know necessarily that they're a victim anymore. And so we look at that and try to build the cases and whether or not we can go forward and bring some charges against them. I think that's part of that we're looking at, I guess, is to what can we do to stop this, because they are here in the United States.
Thank you, Jody. So Chris, how would a business balance the need for public contact information necessary for business with reducing the risk of business email compromise?
Right. It's really a balance, and it's understanding what your requirements are. So as the sales organization, the marketing organization, they're highly driven on contact, and so not disallowing contact altogether while still receiving some good bit of protection is tricky. It's going to come down to all the policies that you put in place to mitigate the risk to allow you to have some public-facing contact information. One of the things that SDN has done is to put a contact section under all of the sales associates and all the primary people in our contact page. So where we've got a bunch of our senior leadership as well as sales people, instead of clicking through to their email address, there's a contact blurb where you can enter email address and the message that you have for that person, and it'll get sent directly to that person. And that's one of the main things that I've always wondered about the general messaging, right? When you send a general message in a contact us page of a company, where does that go? How do I know it's getting to the person that I want it to get to? Well, if you provide that kind of messaging capability for each person that you're listing, then you can get through. When you're thinking about social media, a lot of it's about controlling who sees what. Are you putting your profile out there to be public, or are you keeping it just within the network that you've developed? Maybe you decide it's worth it. It's a benefit versus risk kind of evaluation, and it should be done at least in different functional groups within the organization, if not per person.
Thanks, Chris. Erica, who can report crime directly to the Fusion Center?
We would be not the first line of defense for people. We would get the reports from either law enforcement or from Jody's office. Now, if people did contact us, of course, we would help them and get them in touch with the right people, but we would not be the initial call. We would get it from our local law enforcement or from Jody's office.
Thank you, Erica. All right, now it is your turn. Who has some questions for our panel up here? Yes, you in the back.
Erica, you mentioned toward the end of your presentation not to use Gmail in a business account.
Right.
Or
Right. Don't use a free generic email. You can use it's called G Suite, so it is still by Google. It's a few dollars a month per user, or Office 365 or Zoho is one of the other ones. So use an inexpensive alternative because it does make it look more legitimate if it has an actual business name on it.
Chris, kind of gathered from some of the emails you were showing, SDN must use some sort of a simulated phishing email program.
Right.
KnowBe4?
We do use KnowBe4.
Okay. I use KnowBe4 too. I've been using it for 3, 4, 5 years or better. I love it. It's great for educating employees and broadening awareness to things. But where I've had a real trouble with it though, excuse me, is simulating an actual employee's email, particularly executives. And the reason I don't like to do that, and sometimes I even refuse to do it, is because it breaches trust. So if my company president, if I send out an email that spoofs his email, or spoofs his name in his email, then all of a sudden I have a lack of trust, and nobody really wants to read emails from this person anymore. And the same goes for many executives. So yeah. I walk that fine line. So if I do craft a simulated phishing email and put it part of my rotation with KnowBe4, I want to put some indicators in there. I don't want it to be too obvious that it's false, but
yeah.
yet.
Well, yeah.
So describe to me how SDN would do something, or a good approach to spoofing an executive's email address without breaching trust.
Right. Well, I like your point. It's an excellent indicator, because I think it goes to then the question about whether you're trying to get employees to fail or whether you're trying to teach them something. And so if you're trying to get an employee to fail a phishing test, then you're going to make it look as real as it possibly can. And you could find some way to get them to click on it. And I don't think that's usually the point of conducting these tests. I don't know how SDNs is configured. I don't administrate the program. And so I can't tell you specifically how we operate. I will tell you I have not seen one that has essentially looked like it came from inside. I think the goal with each one is to specifically teach about a particular vulnerability. So if you're teaching about, teaching to look at something that's crafted in a very strange way, an odd way that you wouldn't expect, that's fine. Make that be the point that you're going after. If you're trying to get them to look at the email address itself, make that be what you're getting them to go after. But don't go to the point where you've created an email that essentially legitimately could have come directly from that person, unless you've got other policies in place that you're testing. You're always testing against something. So if you've got policies in place to do a verification on that money transfer, then you send a message, and maybe this is even more targeted because you're going to send it just to accounting, asking them to do something to transfer the money, and see if they follow the verification procedures. And then pat them on the back when they get it right too. That's an important part. You want your employees to know when they get it right. So when that happens at our organization, when I click on an email that I suspect of phishing, and it was one that was sent out by the system, it says, "Congratulations, you found a simulated test." So that reinforcement that they did what they were supposed to do when they found something in that message they didn't trust, or when they followed the proper action, that further reinforces what you want them to do on a daily basis. But I can't speak for every organization, every individual. If there's a need for that kind of trust, and there would be a breakdown in trust because there's a relationship that needs to be maintained, then that's the best thing for your organization to do.
My employees think I should bring them cookies when they pass a test.
That sounds fair.
I think that, right? Just
do
a
your
good
job.
Yes.
I have a few questions. So for Jody, what email address, I guess first question is, I was getting a lot of emails from a particular customer of ours that wouldn't have been right. And I mean, it looked so authentic. And so I sent it to the customer, and they said, yeah, we're getting a lot of that. So those kind of emails, would we send those on to you at Consumer Protection?
We would ask that you send those on because we like to see the different traits that they're using because they do deploy different things. So you can send those to consumer help, all one word, at state.sd.us.
Okay. Is that whether or not those customers reside here in South Dakota or not?
Yes, I mean, we would take those because we're going to get them forwarded off. If there's something that looks different, we're going to get them forwarded off to where they have the database where they can actually look at those. If we've got victims, then we're forwarding those on to Erica's group, to DSU, because we have an agreement with them. So they do our looking and stuff, the technical portion of it.
Another question, so I get these emails, I don't know who it's for here, that come from China, and they say that, well, your domain is going to be used over here in China, and are you, is it okay with you that we do that? Should we really be responding to those?
I wouldn't respond to those at
Right.
all.
I'm not gonna answer that, but I likely wouldn't.
We
Yeah,
would,
I-
if we get them at our office, we would not. We would report them to spam through the state site. We wouldn't give out any information and we wouldn't respond to them. If we get them in our helpline, which we get inundated with, stuff like that, it goes to a spam folder. So,
Somebody who keeps sending you emails and you want to unsubscribe to it, I mean, that seems like a good way for them to capture your information too. Would you, if you're trying to get rid of a whole bunch of stuff that keeps coming in and they do offer an unsubscribe button, should you click on it? And if you do, should you strip off your signature area so that they're not capturing your logo and all of that? Because I think what's happened to me a couple of times is that people then, if I've unsubscribed, and it doesn't present you with another screen that says, hey, you unsubscribed from such and such a list. Now I just gave them all of my signature information, and they use that, to go after and to send things to other people.
Right, and sometimes it's a link to a website where you can unsubscribe. And if that website has been compromised, or if it is an illegitimate website, it could essentially download malware when you visit that site. So your concern is valid. I only unsubscribe in that method when I'm dealing with a domain that I know I have essentially been registered to. So if I know that I signed up for something by downloading a document on the internet a couple days ago, and now I see an email come in from that location, that makes sense to me. That's something I was expecting. Again, go to that, were you expecting it, or were you not expecting it? And then I'll use that unsubscribe because I know that is triggered off of the action that I took. But if it's something that looks a little strange, I haven't visited that website, or I haven't signed up for promotional opportunities from that company, then no, then I wouldn't respond to that. I wouldn't go after the unsubscribe. That's the email blocking feature is where I would go to that, to take care of that.
You could also go to the website, so if it is like a sales, like I get tons of emails from Kohl's, go to the website separately, not from within the email, and often you can find an unsubscribe that way, instead of following a link that might lead to a fake website.
Yes.
Question for each of you, I guess. For some of us who are not sophisticated in these things and just need it really dumbed down and simplified, what's the one most important thing, the easiest, cheapest, fastest, most impactful thing that I can do to protect myself?
Unplug your computer. Hands down the best. There isn't. I mean, that's the tough part, is that that once we figure out a way to cover one vector, the attack comes from another vector. So that one thing today is not the one thing tomorrow. And so we would be doing a disservice to say, here's your one thing. Because it's not. It just is complex, and that's the world we live in.
But I would say just be suspicious of everything.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, we live in the Midwest, it's, we're all nice, right? But if it comes in, and we're trusting, so if it comes in by email, just be suspicious.
And it's cheap to be suspicious.
We should have led with the unplug it and
Right.
could save you guys out 2 hours. Been done. From my point, I mean, I'd say the same thing. We are trusting. It's not only consumers that typically here in the Midwest, we pay our bills, businesses. They want to get their bills paid. And so that's the quick, easy way. One thing I would say that I didn't touch on or expand on, if you're a business that, you just, for whatever reason, you don't want to report that you've had an incident specifically where you've paid a bill and funds are out there, the one thing that I would caution you when you start calling the banks, and they tell you, okay, yes, we believe what you're saying, we'll go ahead and we'll put a hold on those funds for you. Don't take that as we've saved this, because the hold, we've had it happen way too many times where the hold doesn't hold those funds. And when the specific scammer goes in and asks for those funds, they're releasing a portion of them. The one specifically with the business, the attorney, they released the $5,000 initially on that Friday to him. Saturday he went in again, and they were putting the hold on the rest of the funds, as we were told, and he received an additional portion of it. And Monday morning, after we had talked to them and they said, yep, there's a hold placed on there, the funds were released because there were multiple scams that were going on, and actually a portion of it the bank took to cover their costs as well. So a hold, I mean, you go, okay, great, we're saved. The hold has been placed on this account, we're gonna get our funds back, and that's just not true. So when we start talking about freezes and so forth, you guys are not going to be able to actually put a freeze on that account. You're gonna have to have law enforcement involved in that capacity to get that account actually frozen. So we're not out here, it's confidential, we're not out, like Eric had said, we're not out there to publish that information to anybody. Again, our goal is to stop the funds from getting to that scammer, and then we'll go and try and track down where things had come from, so.
I think I saw a question from last time back there. Did someone, yeah?
Yeah, I had a question. This is mostly for Jody, I think, and you may have just alluded to it in your last answer too, but I work for a bank, and so I'm curious from your perspective, what is it that banks do well? And this might go beyond business email compromise too, or what do you wish banks would do a better job of?
I'm gonna bite my lip here a little bit so I don't spill out things that I shouldn't spill out. I will tell you from our perspective, and I can only speak from our perspective, every bank is different in the way that they respond to us when we call to talk to their fraud department or their law enforcement entity or component in there. And each one of them is different. The language is different. This summer I had gone to a conference for the National Association of Attorney Generals, and that was one of the components. We had a banking entity come in, and this was one of the areas that we talked about, and the holds, and what an actual hold means. And from her perspective, that those funds should have been held. There are several banks, again, I won't name them, but that we have a difficult time, and the scammers know that. There are specific banks that they use to perpetrate the scams. And I think the consistency, obviously here in South Dakota, we work well with our banks here, have never really had any issues necessarily with the banks. It's when you start dabbling into going to the other states that we do have issues. And I think, there's general language that should be across the board because there's the federal requirements and so forth, but I don't think that's being used. And some do a better job than others. So, and that's the reality that we do live in, so. If
Yes.
it helps you or not.
Just wanted to help the gentleman out front here, I asked that question earlier. One of the things you can do with your organization is to turn on DKIM for your domain. Make sure you lock down your email. It's not exactly the silver bullet that would stop all that impersonation from coming in, but it certainly helps. And I've done that with all my domains, and you first let it sit there and then it'll watch status, and you eventually turn it into a quarantine, and that'll actually prevent a lot of those unauthenticated emails from coming in.
Who else has a question for our experts up here?
So we had a customer who got hit with ransomware on a Sunday afternoon, and they didn't find it until Monday morning. Of course, everything was totally destroyed on the server. $18,000 was the request. So at that point, they should have called Consumer Protection.
And we would have walked them through the steps and got in contact with the bank right away and
So they
started
didn't
looking
send
at
the money.
They didn't end up sending the money.
No.
But yeah, we would have taken the information just so we can get it logged in, look at what they're doing differently.
And would somebody have connected to their system to capture any information about where it was coming
We would have-
from? Or?
We would work with DSU and they would tell you specifically what information needs to be captured, how to capture it, so that they can look at it further.
Okay.
In purple.
Can you explain in layman's terms what you meant about the DKM server?
I can't, I'm not familiar with it. Just go Google it. DKIM is basically an encryption, so it actually locks down who can send from your domain. Okay, so if it comes from a different location, like you guys said, it's out of the country or whatever, it's not something that's legitimate within your organization. Well, it flags it and puts it in quarantine. So your users don't necessarily see those, or at least that's the point, right? A lot of mail servers now are actually requiring. I ran into it because a lot of my customers were using Google Suite, and all of a sudden my customers couldn't receive our email. I use Rackspace for hosts, and Rackspace, oh, hey, just turn that on, you're golden. In fact, everybody should be doing it now. If you haven't done it, do it. Okay. So, work with your email provider on that.
Is that DKIM?
Yep.
Any other questions? Well, obviously, I'm not Brady, but I'm going to take a second to thank Brady for coming in very early this morning to join us. So if you would help me. Thank you. I'm Jessie Schmidt from the Better Business Bureau, and we are so grateful to be able to put on this cybersecurity event for all of you. I see some of our small businesses that are accredited with the Better Business Bureau in this room. I see folks from the Fusion Center and SDN, Kellogg, and Avera, our partners. We're so grateful to have these sponsors because I can tell you frankly, we couldn't do what we did this morning without the help of SDN Communications, specific Nikki back here, Andrea behind that camera. We're going to have this out there online, right? And so we'll email you all a link if we got your, if you pre-registered. If we didn't get that information, just get a hold of me and I'll collect your email later today. Of course, Avera, this is a new facility for us, but it really worked very well. So our thanks to Mickey, Tom, who was here earlier, and the folks at Avera. And then you have some great information in front of you, provided a lot by SDN Communications. If if your organization needs extra posters or anything like that, they have them on that back table. So if you have a couple spots you want to put them in your office. And I think lastly, I want to thank our speakers. You know, the Better Business Bureau is, oftentimes people think, oh, that's where I go to complain. That's really a small part of what we do. We lift up good business practices. We have businesses that are very trustworthy, and that trust and integrity is all part of what they do. So we're grateful to have all of you here today. We couldn't put on these events without our ABs and then again, our partners in the community. I had the pleasure of meeting Jody many years. We've worked the circuit together, talking to businesses and individuals and families about what they need to watch out for. And you always think, gosh, do I have to talk about that grandparent scam one more time? Yes, you do, because then you hear that through the law enforcement that somebody else was taken. So we can only do that through the support of these partners. The Fusion Center has provided us a speaker the last several years. Trevor Jones was our speaker last year. He's old hat now at the Fusion Center, but we're always glad to have those folks with us as well. And as I said, Chris Isles is here again, and just a great presenter. You make things, you can boil them down to my dumb level where I can understand them. So I want to thank you all for coming today. Know that October is Cybersecurity Month. And I'm just going to give you one more anecdotal story. First off, I would tell you, never be embarrassed if you're a victim, or please let your clients know. You know, I always tell you, don't be flattered. You're not the first victim they picked on today. They've sent out 100,000 emails, and they just need a couple of people to bite on them. So I always tell them, don't be flattered and don't be embarrassed. Law enforcement is going to help you absolutely as much as they can. But if you don't report it, you have no chance of helping yourself. And you set yourself up to be a victim again, because these folks are very, very savvy. And so they're just going to lie and wait. And I don't know how much you talked about beta testing. You talked about trust with testing. So a few weeks ago, I got an email that said the Better Business Bureau has partnered with Gallup polls to conduct a straw poll. So if the 2020 election were held today, who would you vote for? And I'm like, well, yeah, we're very non-political, but okay. So I forwarded it to my boss, and we have an international association that kind of governs everything we do. And I'm like, did you do this? And he sent it on to our international, and in the meantime, I forwarded it. We have an outside IT organization. I'm like, hey, is this, what's up with this? And he emailed me back, in the meantime, the international organization's calling me, screenshots, send that off to them. It was a beta test within our own organization. Our president didn't know about it, of course, but of course he didn't get the email either. So in typical Jessie fashion, I had created a whole kerfluffle in about 3 minutes worth of time. And then lucky for me, as I was forwarding it on to somebody, I clicked in the body of the email, so then I got to watch a 20-minute video on how not to do that again. So I would tell you, test early and test often. And it's not in a gotcha fashion. I mean, I've gotten a lot of laughs out of this story, so I'll use it for years. But again, it's all in the interest of protecting your customers, your clients, your employees, their data. So thank you for coming today. You're getting out of here way earlier than you normally do. Jody's got one last word.
I have actually a question for you guys specifically. Last year we had talked, and you had a person that was had a panel regarding insurance for data breaches. How many of you guys have ever approached your insurance agents regarding a policy that talks about specifically about BEC? Just out of curiosity, has anybody ever thought about sitting down, seeing if there's a specific policy that could be written for this?
Cybersecurity, but not BEC.
Not specific to that? Okay. I was just curious, there are other states that I've been to where conferences where they're actually sitting down with their insurance agents and their companies writing specific policies for certain things, and this is an area, so I was just curious.
I think that's a great idea because, you know, it's always a cost-benefit analysis, right? Cyber insurance is very expensive. And And then still, it doesn't always cover everything, right? So you're like, hey, we're great, we have cyber insurance coverage, but it doesn't cover that one thing. So you should all be looking into cyber insurance. I think that's a great question. Maybe we can pursue that a little bit more.
It just is, we were at a conference and they touched on it, so I thought, well, I'm gonna bring it up and see if anybody's posed that question to your insurance agents.
Thank you all for coming. Have a great day, and we'll have you back next year.
Thank you.